The situation along the front line in Ukraine keeps deteriorating, but at long last, help is on the way. The first big shipments for fresh aid to Ukraine, mostly from the United States, are already crossing over the international border from Poland into Ukraine and will likely have an impact within days along the front line. This and more in this situation report. Hello and welcome. Ukraine keeps striking the Russian infrastructure, the Russian oil infrastructure. A number of targets were hit, and videos show that those strikes have been, at least to a certain degree, successful. The Russian strikes on in return are also successful for the Russians. We have reports here, for instance, that the Ukrainian side has to shut down power supply, basically do load shedding in Ukraine to keep the electricity grid stable, as it's well known that a lot of the Ukrainian power plants as well as the transformer stations have been hit in recent Russian attacks. Let's switch over to the front line north of the Seversky Donetsk. We have continued fighting reported. Actually, the reports are indicating that the fighting has intensified between Kupiansk and Kremina here. But at the same time, I cannot confirm any change in territory. So while the Russian attacks seem to have been stronger, there is no sign that they have been successful, on the other hand. South of the Seversky Donetsk, the Russians keep attacking as well. South of Bilohorivka, the Ukrainians report a number of defeated attacks in the area roughly of this here between Vesele and south of Bilohorivka. As of now, I do not see that the Ukrainian claims of having successfully defeated those attacks are not true. There is no sign of recent Russian successes. At Klishivka and at Chasiv Yar, the fighting is continuing. The Russians keep up the pressure towards Chasiv Yar, but as of now, I cannot confirm fresh successes of the Russians in the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. The front line seems to be stable as of now here, but we actually have a Ukrainian counterattack that was somewhat successful in the area of Klishivka. Here we have between Klishivka and Ivanivske, this tree line was recaptured. There is visual evidence of the Russians striking Ukrainian positions, proving that those two tree lines were recaptured by the Ukrainians over the last few days. Further south, we do have changes in territory, and we're talking about the area of Avdiivka. Here in Avdiivka, the Russians keep up their momentum, which allowed them to advance further, especially as a mechanized brigade that was tasked with defending Ocheretune abandoned their positions and allowed the Russians a deep pincer, a deep punch into the front line. The south of Ocheretune is now completely under Russian control, as it's been reported. Also, east of Novokalinove, the area here is now under Russian control as well. And this is my Tomcat being very vocal in case you heard it, but don't mind him. He's fine. He's just seeking attentions. So east of Novokalinove here, the area, the Russian control has been extended as well. And in Ocheretune, the Russians didn't just capture the complete south part of the town, they also advanced massively in the northern part. The whole town is now under pressure. It seems to be the case that the Ukrainians are still holding positions inside of the town itself, but overall the situation is dramatically bad. The 47th Mechanized Brigade had to be sent back to stabilize the front line after their colleagues had abandoned the positions, and as we can see, this was only somewhat successful. We're talking about one of the cornerstones of the Ukrainian first line of defense behind the front line that was built up after the fall of Avdiivka. Ocheretune is, according to most reports, one of those fortifications, and videos show that the trenches that were dug and that are now under control by the Russians were solid and deep, seemingly decently built. So the Ukrainians lost valuable positions that would have helped stabilize their position here. And now, obviously, the Russians have penetrated the main defensive line that was established behind the front line. This is going to be a problem. How long Ocheretune will be able to hold out, the rest of it, how long the Ukrainians will be able to hold out, is obviously unknown. As of now, there is no detailed information about this. We can only speculate at this point, but the situation is far from unproblematic. The Russians advanced further south of it in Novobakhmutivka. They are widening their piercing of the front line, obviously, as theoretically this would allow the Ukrainians to cut them off. But we have to emphasize this is theoretically. The Ukrainians don't seem to have the forces, especially under Russian artillery fire and glide bomb bombardment, to actually pierce through the 3 to 4 kilometers in here to cut something up in the northwest. But to prevent the threat of it, the Russians try to advance in both directions, northeast and southwest. And here Novobakhmutivka has now fallen into Ukrainian hands, into Russian hands, and they actually keep advancing further. We have here a Ukrainian mill blogger confirming that basically all of Novobakhmutivka is now under Russian control. Further south, the Russians have crossed the river at Berdichi. Here they have established themselves on the western side of it, so Berdichi is now either fallen or about to fall, and the Russians have also managed to advance somewhat further forward in Semenivka. Here we can see last we've had the geolocalization here, so they advanced somewhat north. Theoretically, roughly this part could still be under Ukrainian control, but this is speculation at that point. We simply do not have proof of the Russians there yet, but we know that they should be under full control of this here and roughly of this part here. So there's only this in the middle still left under likely Ukrainian control, like somewhere this area here. Further south, the Russians keep advancing as well. We have additional advances by the Russians in the area of Marinka. The Russians advance inside of Georgivka. They continue pushing westwards and gained another few, like 300 to 400 meters in this direction, and they also managed to gain control over tree lines south of it, basically pushing the front line south to the west as well. The Russians also showed a video of them having control over, as you can see here, of Novobakhmutivka. We have it here on the westernmost part. This should prove that Novobakhmutivka is under full Russian control yet, as I said in the last situation report, but so far we only had the Russians in the eastern part of the Dachas here, and while the Russians already claim that Novobakhmutivka is under their control, there's some conflicting news, so there's a theoretical possibility that the western part of the Dachas is still held by the Ukrainians, but as said, this is speculation at that point. Some Russians confirm that, some Russians deny that. I have not seen visual evidence of the Ukrainians still in that western part, though, over the last couple of days. The Ukrainians are saying that there are currently more than 10 heavy attacks in the area of Novomikhailivka. The Russians use two full brigades, as well as several regiments in the area. So a significant superiority in material, manpower, and obviously ammunition helps the Russians push forward to the west here. Further south and to the west, we have some additional informations. The Russians started bypassing Urush. As we can see, they were on the high ground to the east here, and now we have geolocalizations of them here inside the trees. I have some visualization, some geolocalizations where it's supposedly even friendly fire by the Russians hitting their own troops, but this would show them roughly at this point here. So the Russians likely control that tree line as of now, probably have advanced over this, which obviously endangers the situation of Urush. We talked about it in the last situation report that the Russians unloaded troops in this building here. Now they are to the tree line in the east, which makes it more likely that of the Ukrainians being forced to abandon the southern part of Urush fairly soon. Further west, we have news from the area south of Orikhiv. Here, the Russians are being attacked in a video that is geolocalized here. That's a video of drones attacking Russians in Robotine, as well as in a basement. And the video shows them to occupy the basement here, which is more or less here. As said, I don't think the deep state map, the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, is accurate about Robotine. The southern part here should be under Russian control by now, as we see consistent Russian presence in this area, which would indicate that the southern part, roughly at least this part here, should be more or less under solid Russian control as of now. We have an interesting geolocalization by the German journalist Julian Reichelt from Kiliki. According to him, the Ukrainians actually managed to extend their control in Kiliki, to extend their bridgehead. And as we can see, they almost doubled it according to this. And just to go to the map, this should be roughly until, where was it? Let's check it again. This is where the two combine, and then roughly the equal distance to that here. So roughly until this here should be under Ukrainian control now, if he's been right. I'm not completely, I can't completely confirm it, but so far he's been fairly consistent with his geolocalizations. So it seems likely that the Ukrainians actually managed to extend their bridgehead over the area here. Overall, we have the Ukrainian analyst Mashovets, who is a colonel in the Ukrainian armed forces. He's saying the Russians have now concentrated between Berdichy and Novokalinove strength in troops in the strength of a reinforced division. This is just this area here. So the Russians have troops of a reinforced division just in this area to keep up the momentum and to keep rolling into this and to allow them to break through. And as I said, the loss of Ocheretine, which seems to be in the progress, at least the front positions of it are definitely lost, is a very, very bad development for the Ukrainians, as this was one of their fortified lines behind Avdiivka. This was where they were supposed to stop the Russians for weeks and better months, to allow them to build a second line behind that, and then probably a further line behind this. The Russians haven't just reached it already, they already pierced it here, which is obviously causing tremendous danger for the area here for the Ukrainians, as they are still lacking in ammunition, in anti-tank weaponry, etc. We talked about this in the past situation reports, that the Ukrainians, for instance, themselves said that the Russian successes here in Krasnohorivka were simply because they didn't have artillery to shoot at them, and they didn't have anti-tank guided weapons to strike the Russians attacking them. But as said, there is coming some help here. We have initially, before we go to international aid, we have some news about troop generation inside of Ukraine. According to US members of Congress, Ukraine has extended its production of the Neptune anti-ship missiles by the factor of 10. Obviously, the baseline is a question here, and a factor of 10 depends on how much it was initially, but it shows that the Ukrainian production initiatives are working, and they say they are currently in the process of extending its range to 1,000 kilometers. Now, the Neptune is an anti-ship missile, and 1,000 kilometer would basically keep most of the Black Sea under their fire control, but at the same time, it has been used against land targets. It definitely has a secondary land target role as well. So this would give the Ukrainians basically a cruise missile with a range of 1,000 kilometers that they can launch. Ukraine is to extend its manpower pool. Ukraine is now stopping consular services for all Ukrainians in a fighting age that are outside of Ukraine and that haven't registered for the draft for the military service yet. So basically, if you're a Ukrainian man between 18 and 60 and you have not been at the embassy to sign up to be registered where you live, and that you're ready to fight, then you won't get consular services anymore. That would mean no new passports, no birth certificates, no certification of, I don't know, your driver's license, everything that's been done in a consulate, to obviously increase the pressure on those men that have fled. And some of them are simply on an extended vacation, for instance, in Indonesia, in Bali, and without valid passports, they will have trouble what to do. Ukraine said who does not want to defend Ukraine basically is not going to get the services of Ukraine either. So documents will only be given to those men if they are to fly back to Ukraine. Obviously an attempt to increase the manpower pool, the available manpower pool, which is, and we have to say that, direly needed. At the same time, the Kiev Independent quotes a survey that I didn't check, so I have no idea how accurate that is, but they quote it that 62% of the Ukrainians are prepared to fight for their country. Obviously, that means 1/3 is not, but at the same time, 62% is still a massive amount, and as they mention, it's higher than anywhere else in Europe, maybe outside Russia, I'm not completely sure, but it's still a massive number and should mean that there is still a significant potential for additional soldiers, which again are direly needed. In the political sphere, we have news from Moldova. Moldova said that they confiscated more than 1.1 million US dollars from opposition politicians that returned from a trip to Moscow. They say that the politicians were meant to bribe and to bribe voters, to bribe other politicians, and to buy people in demonstrations by paying them basically a wage for demonstrations. And now they confiscated the money in cash coming from Moscow. The money was split up in sums under $10,000, which would require them being announced, but they say that it was clearly a ruse to avoid this, so they confiscated it. And in Russia, the news is that the deputy defense minister Ivanov was arrested for corruption. Now, the interesting part is, according to reports, the sum that he is accused of is 1 million ruble. Now, 1 million ruble is more or less $10,000. This is a ludicrously low sum for the corruption that is understood to be omnipresent in Russia. 10,000 should be nothing for the corruption that he and others are likely involved. So experts for Russia, which I am not, but experts for Russia say this is a political thing. This is not about corruption. Basically, it's a fighting of wings and getting rid of persons that are troublesome in this context. So this is a sign of infighting, according to experts, as said, of which I am none. Then international aids. The Dutch are participating with 150 million euro in an initiative for air defense and are saying to plan to buy a SHORAD, short-range air defense, for 60 million. This short-range air defense seems to be centered around drones, so this might mean just anti-drone guns for small consumer drones, or it might mean weapons against the Shahid. I'm not completely sure here, but in total 210 million euros from the Dutch. The Danish government is giving 300 million euros in aid, 25 million of those for orders of defense equipment inside of Ukraine. And this is really important. This cannot be underestimated, because in the last situation report, I told you that the minister responsible for that said that the Ukrainian defense industry is capable of it does have the 3 times the capacity of what the Ukrainian government can currently use. They only ordered $6 billion worth of equipment from their domestic defense industry, but it would have a 3 times the capacity. They're simply lacking the funds. Now, by sending money and having it built inside of Ukraine, you avoid, obviously, transporting stuff, you save jobs, you allow them to reinvest, you basically help themselves to help. You allow them to help themselves, but obviously it brings the risk of corruption, of losing money on the way, which is still, obviously, corruption is still a problem inside of Ukraine, but Denmark is going the first step here, and this will likely help Ukraine a lot, especially if others chip in, as this is not requiring the Western defense industry to build anything, and the Ukrainians can build stuff exactly to their needs and exactly to their experiences. The United Kingdom is sending a 500 million pound package that should be, I don't know, 650 something like this $1 million. 400 vehicles are among that, 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition, so rifles, pistols, etc. 60 boats. I guess that's something like ribs or something. We're not talking about 40-meter boats or something. That should be like small for river activity. Air defense, they're sending Storm Shadows, and they're, according to reports, are sending paveway laser-guided bombs. And that's interesting because so far that is not known to have been sent before. And obviously, usually they are being used from the plane itself by designating a target, or from special forces on the ground. Now, the Ukrainian fighter jets, until the F-16s come, will likely not be able to deploy the paveway properly. But, and that's the interesting thing, special forces as well as the troops along the front line, as soon as they have a laser designator, they can use it to mark targets and have the bombs hit it. Even if it's a moving target, even if it's a tank, they can strike it this way with a laser guided bomb. So that should help Ukraine as well. And the US aid package. The first one is already on the way. The Senate decided yesterday, and this morning, as far as I understood, the US president already signed it, and we have a long list of aid. It's actually already $1 billion in value, and I'm going to explain to you what is coming and why that's important. Now, RIM-7 are basically Sparrows. They are for the Ukrainian air defense systems that are called the Franken-SAM. We're talking about Buk and Kup launchers that ran out of missiles, but where the US and Ukraine have been able to retrofit them to use Western air defense systems. The RIM-7 are in plenty supply, so the Ukraine will not run out of those missiles unless, of course, Congress prevents them to be delivered anytime soon. So this will strengthen the air defense really fast. AIM-9M is the Sidewinder. They will likely be launched from IRIS-T that can launch them, and from NASAMS, so close range air defense, until the F-16 come, which can use them in air-to-air roles as well. Then we have Stinger air defense missiles. This means that the frontline troops will have air defense again. Again, last situation report, I showed you a video of Russian Sukhoi 25 operating in probably several hundred meters altitude, let's say 400 to 500. So in an altitude where there should be serious danger to them. Now, while they were still deploying flares, it showed that they weren't too much afraid of anti-air missiles, of manpads anymore. This might already change within a week, probably in a shorter time, because those shipments were pre-positioned inside of Europe, mostly in Poland, but somewhere else too. And the first trucks have likely at this moment of recording already crossed the Polish-Ukrainian border. Then they're going to give them small arms rounds, including 50 cal, rifle rounds, machine gun rounds, etc. And they're going to give them HIMARS missiles. And this is interesting because this could be the regular Gimlers, the regular missiles they got so far, but Politico says that long-range ATACMS, long range is a relative term, but for the HIMARS, it's a long range system with 300-kilometer range. They have already been delivered. They already have been used twice. We know that this time the US government finally decided they're going to give some to them. So it's likely that additional ATACMS are also in this package and are also already on their way into Ukraine. Then, of course, 155mm shells, but not just high explosive, but dual-purpose improved conventional munitions are cluster munitions. They have proven to be extremely useful against lightly armored tanks, IFVs, etc., and against infantry. So this should help the Ukrainians a lot. 105 and 60mm rounds, good, but nothing too special. Very important, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. The 47th Brigade, 47th Mechanized Brigade, that is currently fighting again at Ocheretune, held the Russians back with countless counterattacks in the area initially of Stepove. They were mostly operating, where the Ukrainians with their Bradleys fought the Russians again and again and again, and obviously they suffered losses during this process. Now they're going to get replacement Bradleys that are going to be on the front line as well. There's already video of them supposedly being on trucks and already on their way into Ukraine. I wasn't fully able to verify that's from there, that this is a current video, but we know that they're already on the way. Then the next important thing, obviously, mine MRAPs. Great for transporting. For assaults, not really that great because they're very big, but still better than having to walk on foot. And obviously for transporting in the rear area or close to the front line, MRAPs are extremely important. Humvees, not the best thing, but especially once they are armored, they are fairly solid and good vehicles, so great too. And now we come to something really important. Tube-launched optical tracked wire-guided missiles. Those are the TOW. Those are anti-tank missiles. Again, Krasnohorivka, the Russians were able to gain a foothold. They managed to advance because the Ukrainians didn't have anti-tank weapons. Here they get fresh anti-tank weapons that are being used from a launcher, and Javelin and 84 are shoulder-fired. Javelin, well-known, long-range, self-guided fire-and-forget missile. 84, usually unguided, and a shorter range, but still really helpful and a very good anti-tank weapon. Both are being sent to Ukraine, so both should arrive along the front line fairly soon. Precision aerial munitions, probably JDAM. Anti-tank mines, claymores are those U-shaped, roughly U-shaped mines that are against infantry mostly, so very helpful to defeat ground attacks, and night vision devices obviously enabling the Ukrainians to fight better at night. Overall, a massive aid package that is direly needed and that should help the Ukrainians not quite turn the tide yet. I think that would be far too optimistic to expect the Ukrainians now switching over to the offensive. They still have a lot of problems. One of them is the lack of manpower that they have to solve themselves with their mobilization, but at least the urgent need to gain anti-tank weapons, air defense munitions, and artillery shells, that should be solved at least to a certain degree, really within days. So fantastic news for Ukraine. But again, in the overall picture, that doesn't mean that the tide has turned now and from tomorrow on the Ukrainians will march towards the Russian border. I think that would unfortunately be too optimistic in this context. Still though, we are done with today's situation report. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and leave a comment. What do you think about the current aid packages, and do you think they're going to continue once the 60 billion aid package has run out? Leave your comment in the comment sections. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.